everyone. Welcome to another episode of Process with Meredith and Dave. Tonight we are very, very fortunate to have, I think, the most important illustrator in the world today. Someone that sets tastes and styles for the entire medium. He was a comic artist for a long time. We worked together. In 2010, he joined Marvel Studios and is now the director of visual development. Welcome, Andy Park.
Hey, how's it going, Dave and Meredith?
Good. How are you?
I am great. I'm great. Thanks for having me on. I love your shows that you have and your YouTube. And congrats on everything.
Thank you so much for coming. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I'm so excited.
Of course.
This is like, I mean, when I talk to a writer, I know how to write. And when I talk to an artist, like in the comic book world, they kind of have a good idea of how people are doing their jobs. But this is something so new to me. I'm so excited to talk to you and find out.
And not just that, but this is something where, while it might be new to you, you're very familiar with all of Andy's work.
Yeah.
I mean, we've watched I don't think there's a Marvel movie that we haven't seen at least a few times. And we've got kids.
We're not caught up on WandaVision. So don't give us any spoilers.
We're 2 episodes back. And we bring that show.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're like, it's going to be done.
I think now's a good time before we get too far to mention that Andy's most recent project is WandaVision, a show that I'm sure all of you are enjoying. We're really enjoying over here, Meredith. We're 2 episodes back.
That's why I talked about it. See how I mentioned that?
Yeah,
because Andy's working on that. I'm doing my best. I can't.
2 episodes back, huh?
We're 2 episodes back.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we just watched the episode. I don't want to give spoilers for people who are watching, but it was like showing the outside world.
Right. Like, it starts to break the reality and you see the
first time?
The first time. And so, we're just a little bit back, but
nice.
It has been a little while since we've had a show that we really, really got into together. Meredith has her shows for the part, they're not for me. So this one, we're watching 1 episode at a time, moving on. I don't want to watch the whole thing in one night. We do that all the time, and it's such a shame when it's over.
Not 1 episode at a time. We watch 2 at a time.
Okay, 2. It's true.
2 at a time. 2 at a time. That's good.
That's a good, you get a couple episodes, you get some feel for what's happening in the show, and then...
Totally, especially because these are shorter episodes. So, and people are frustrated online after 30 plus minutes. They're like, no,
but they feel, I don't know, it feels perfect that, I think because of the tone of the show, if you did an hour, it would feel weird, right? Because it's very much...
I don't think people would mind.
Probably not. Because I grew up watching the Leave It to Beavers and the Brady Bunches and those
I see what you're saying. It's kind of the format.
It's the format of the show, so it just fits perfectly.
Well, the only difference is with those shows, you have a finite story that resolves in 30 minutes versus this is like, stay tuned, and everyone's screams at the TV screen like, no. It's like watching a lot for 30 minutes. So I know. Wait till you see.
Being this is a show, a TV show. How is that different in terms of development from the movies? Yeah,
a couple of years back is when we first started WandaVision, but it's actually not that different. Actually, I'm trying to think of what are the differences. The only differences really are just the story that we're telling, which is totally exciting because once they told us we're going to be doing Disney Plus long format storytelling, for the past 10 years, I've been doing films. So the nature of that story opens up opportunities that we didn't have before. Because, before it's always a 2.5 hour movie story. But now we can tell, I don't know how many hours that is, 40 minutes times 9, whatever that is. And there's breaks in between it. So, but as far as for my job and our team, the visual development team, the job is pretty much the same because our main job is to design the heroes and villains. So a lot of times the costumes, if it's a CG character, CG elements, and then the second part is to do keyframes. So in the very beginning, we're doing these still illustrations to kind of depict pivotal moments in these stories. And that'll help the director, the producers, the heads of all the other departments. It's meant to inspire and for them to see these illustrations and be like, that's what the show can look like, or that's what the tone and feel of the show can look like, or that moment. So that's kind of our main job.
I want to rewind a little bit because I feel like we're ahead of. Let's start with, because we're talking about process. You get it. Do you get a script first? Do you have somebody does Marvel Studios approach you with an idea and say, hey, we have an idea of a story we'd like to do? How does it start for you with a movie or a TV show or any project that you're working on? What's the first thing that happens?
First thing that happens usually is not a script, because we're in a unique position because we're full-time at the studio, and this department doesn't really exist in other studios. So pretty much every film that you see out there is made by essentially freelancers. So they hire, directors, they hire script writers, and they hire costume designers per project, right? But the studios are making or trying to figure out which films they want to green light, and then they look out for a director, they look for actors, and then they're writing those scripts. For us, we work in the studio full time. So usually it's either Kevin Feige or one of the producers that will come up to us and say, basically that we're going to be doing this show or this movie. Actually, almost most of the times there is no script yet. So but they want us to start doing design work, knowing that, it's obviously based on a Marvel property.
Whatever character, they know what character they're going to be talking
about. Exactly. Just for example, like in 2012, Kevin came to us and said, we're going to be doing Guardians of the Galaxy. There's no story, there was no director, there was no James Gunn at the time, there was no actors. So they said, okay, spend 2 weeks. There's about 6 of us, in-house artists, and they said, spend 2 weeks, design away. And then we did our research looking, because at that time I'm like, okay, I know I've heard of them, but but I'm not sure who there's some talking raccoon or something. I was like, I can't believe we're doing this film. So then we start doing research, and the Marvel comics is always depicted through the decades in tons of different ways. So we start, we put it on the wall and just figure out, okay, which direction should we take this? And then we'll kind of divvy out, like, okay, I'm going to do a team shot. You can explore the vehicles, depends on people's strengths. You do Groot, and that kind of thing. And then we'll start coming designs for that. So that's one way. Other ways, sometimes there is like actually, it's very rare when there is actually a script, but at least the producer can like come to us and talk to us and say, this is the idea. So for WandaVision, that is an example of them coming to me, the producer, and sharing the idea, the whole sitcom thing. And I'm being very careful because of, I can't reveal things, but I remember when her name is Mary Lavano, when she told me the idea, I was like, oh my gosh, it's one of those pitches where you're just like, that is awesome, that completely makes sense, that's amazing, and this is going to be good. And then from there they'll start giving us like certain moments that they want to see, certain ideas they want to see, and then if there's design work for certain characters that they want us to explore, we'll start exploring and doing some designs.
I was just going to say, hold on. I'm just so curious. So you would like storyboard a scene, for example, like a big moment. Your job also involves, like, you really are drawing on your comic experience to do a lot of the same things that a comic book would do, in that you're deciding what a scene looks like. How similar does it end up being when it actually gets, like, if you come up with a moment of, say, Scarlet Witch giving birth, like if that was a scene, and I don't know what the scene would be, but how often is it exactly how you envision, and how often does it end up just going off in different direction when it starts getting shot?
Just a small correction. It's not, we're not storyboarding, because storyboarding is a very different type of, there's similarities, but storyboards are more like, they're usually more like sketches, where they're like actually telling sequential artwork, much like a comic.
You're like a splash page then.
So yeah, basically, like if you've seen the WandaVision poster initially that was released, that had Paul Bettany as Vision, the human-looking Vision, and Wanda, looking in like the 50s sitcom on a couch with a shadow behind. That's an example of a keyframe. So that was one of the first ones that I did, where they came to me and said, it needs to look like a 50s sitcom. They're sitting, there's a TV, it's glowing red, there's a shadow behind them that will, tease something, and then from there I'm off. So I'm doing like sketches, and then from there I'm painting. So it's not just doing the drawing, but I'm trying to illustrate it in a way. I'm trying to make it look as realistic as possible. I'm trying to make it look like this can be a shot in the film or show, so that when the directors and the producers see it, they're not guessing. They're not like, oh, I can imagine that would look cool. They can be like, yes, this is the tone and look that I want. And so it's a lot of detail, because in that keyframe, I'm like, you know, playing with everything from the outfit to the accessories and all the stuff in the living room, trying to make it feel like a sitcom. Yeah, that one was one of the hardest keyframes I've done, even though it looks so normal. But because of the specificity that I needed to sell, that's the reason why we're doing these keyframes, because we're helping to sell these ideas. Because a lot of times they'll tell us, hey, can you do this keyframe or this character design? They're not fully confident or sure if it's gonna actually be made or if it's a good idea. So by us doing these illustrations or character designs, they can look at it and be like, yes, like I want that in my show, you know. And that's the greatest compliment we'll get sometimes when we'll show it up on a screen, you know, in front of a room. They look at it and they said, I want to see that movie, you know. When they say that, you know, you've done your job, right? So, but other times they'll see it and they'll be like, even though if it's a cool illustration, they might be like, yeah, it doesn't really fit, like what, maybe we should change or pivot, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the purpose of those.
So really looking, because we've actually got it as a backdrop here behind us while we're talking, and we'll put it up so people can see the full image, but it looks like the show. And I always wonder, especially in a show like this, where, you know, costume design and set design, just how much of that really originates there and how much of it comes from concept art. And it really seems like with this show, it's very much from concept art.
Yeah. I mean, we're very fortunate because we're in the very beginning part of the process, right? Like while they're writing the script, we're already designing, you know, and we're coming up with the look and feel of it, right? Also to answer, I didn't answer your second part of your question, Meredith, about like how often does it look like the show. Like this is an example that, you know, I did it, and from there it's not like kind of gets out of my hand, where from there like the costume designer comes into play, right? So sometimes they'll take cues from these keyframes that we'll do, but they're also free to continue to explore, because these stories evolve, right? And we're doing it very early on. The art department led by the production designer, they go ahead and they're the ones creating the look and the sets and the vehicles and just everything else, the world. So that can evolve and change. Yeah, I agree. Like when I finally did watch the final show, you know, I looked at, you know, a lot of the backdrops. I'm like, oh wow, it does look very similar to like even this layout and the setup, and you know, not every detail, but definitely the look and feel, you know. And that happens a lot, where you could see, like me and my coworkers will watch a movie or go to the premiere, and then as we're watching it, and then we see a scene, and then I'll like nudge my coworker, because I'm like, oh my god, your keyframe, that's that moment. Sometimes it looks almost one-to-one. I remember there's various movies throughout the years where I'm like, wow, that looks almost one-to-one to our keyframe painting we did. And then other times, you know, it'll like adjust, but at least the spirit of it is there.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
To have such an impact on how these pictures evolve and are visualized. Do you go back, like, is there artists that you are your favorite, because you're working in the Marvel universe? So do you have favorite artists that you go back to like over and over again? Or do you sometimes have a director or a producer, whoever approaches you first, say, I really want this era, or I want it to look like so-and-so, like I really like Jack Kirby's, I don't know.
Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
I really like Jack Kirby's Fantastic Four. Let's make it
yeah.
Avengers.
Thank you.
You know, X-Men.
Yeah.
I just showed my comic ignorance when like, I don't know this stuff.
Definitely I have my favorites, right? Dave might, I don't know if Dave knows, but well, it's such a trite answer, but you know, I grew up I was collecting comics pretty much in the mid 80s to like, you know, the 90s, mid 90s is when I got into comics and started working for Rob Liefeld. But throughout my junior high and high school years, my number one idol was Jim Lee, right? I had a Jim Lee wall with just all his posters and artwork, all the X-Men stuff he was doing. Early on, there was artists like Mark Bright, John Byrne, you know, there's Alan Davis, Bob Layton. There's so many artists that I loved. So sure, when I'm doing my work at Marvel Studios, like I'm sure they will be inspirations. So it depends on the character, right? So for example, when I was working on Thor Ragnarok, that whole movie, the director Taika Waititi, he was a huge fan of Jack Kirby. So he really wanted this movie essentially to be a love letter to him. So that was a note that was given to us over and over again. Like we would, our whole job is to take the source material and modernize and bring it in some kind of reality that is believable, right? For today's audience.
It had to be a challenge to get Jack Kirby's the big, broad, bold shapes. And I mean, the movie looked incredible, but just conceptually, it must have been incredibly difficult.
Yeah, because by that time I was already, I don't know how many years I've been working, and I've worked on several movies since the first Captain America film. So you kind of have a look and feel, or kind of feel for like what it requires to make it believable. And when Taika came in, he just like shook things up, because he was just like, I want Hela, to have those antlers, and then normally, because I'm trained in that kind of thinking of like, okay, it has to be believable. So I'm like, okay, you can't do that, because they come out, in the comic from here, and they're like this wide, right? So there's, how the heck can you have a character and turn their head and it's just swinging around, right? So that's an example of like, where I'm like, okay, the solution is to make it realistic. You still want that silhouette, but you can't have it on her head. So I was like, oh, one way is to get it on her back and shoulders, right? So you have it here, not attached to her, side of her, back of her ears or something. I did that, and Taika wasn't having it. He was just like, he kept on just saying, I want Jack Kirby. So I was like, okay. So I did it, right? So that was one example where I did it, and eventually he approved it. But that was one example where I'm like, I don't know how they're gonna accomplish this, like whether it's practically, whether it's the costume designer. But that was one that we kind of knew they're gonna solve it through VFX, right? So I'm like, okay, that's an example where like, go ahead, VFX, this is yours. I did what I was told. I tried to make it more practical for you, but and I think because he was saying he wanted like 6 feet wide, right? Even some of the covers that I did had it 6 feet wide, but in the movie, I don't think you ever saw it that big. It's pretty much like almost like maybe here at the biggest, and then sometimes it got even smaller. So, but they made it work, and
you have to rewatch that just to like watch that, just for that part, for the Hela headdress.
Well, and when it works, you don't
even think about it.
Yeah, you don't.
Yeah, exactly. That's a testament to like great VFX, and yeah. Jake Morrison did that one. So yeah, definitely we are always hearkening back to certain creators, and certain ones. Sometimes they tell us, excuse me, or sometimes it's just our own. Like I love this creator, so I'm looking at them more and more. But I'm sure I don't know if any of I love Jim Lee, and he was my #1 like favorite comic book artist. But I don't think I ever drew like him. And I was always that type of artist where I'm like, I'm not, as I was a kid, when I was an adolescent, I never tried to like just trace or copy somebody. I tried to like, I studied it, absorbed it, but I never just tried to like, okay, I'm going to do their head exactly the way they did it. I just never had that in me. So I'm always trying to like, but I know it probably absorbed and influenced me as I'm drawing, but I don't think I've ever been like accused of being like, he's this kind of clone. I don't know.
No, I really don't think so. When you came to Top Cow, you had a very individual style already. Now you had already been working. You were at Extreme for how long were you with Rob?
Rob, I was with him for just like 2.5 years, actually. Not that long, but that's where I started. I was 19, and then just 2.5 years with him.
19, yeah. 19 is young. It seems like 22 is average for people that start out, right away.
Well, no, you're right. Yeah, I always say that I'm always eternally grateful to Rob for giving me a chance at 19. But honestly, when I got hired, I actually thought like, this is too early. I'm not ready, actually. Like, I didn't think I was good enough. But of course, once you're offered that gig, you're not going to say no. but I did feel that way. I'm like, I think I need more time to get better, but I'm not, I'm going to take this opportunity. So, I was thrown in because I was going to UCLA at the time. I was, good Korean boy. Like, I'm going to get my degree, make my parents proud, and then I'm going to pursue comics. That was the plan. After I finished my freshman year, I went to San Diego Comic-Con, portfolio in hand, because at that point, I've never met a professional artist in my life. No one in my family is an artist. And no one around me. So I'm like, I don't know how good I am. Like, my mom says I'm good. What is, I love you, Mom, but it doesn't mean anything.
Moms say all kinds of stuff.
Right? So I went to San Diego Comic-Con with the purpose of, I just want to critique. There was no internet at the time, right? So I had to get it in front of someone to show, hey, should I give up on this dream and just pursue something else? Or do I have, give me some advice. Craziest thing. I went to San Diego Comic-Con, and by that time, that was the second one I've ever been to, right? And then I waited. There was the lines, portfolio review lines. They had a bunch of those, and I remember waiting like hours in those. The very first one I went into was Image, because Image was like, it formed some years back, and it was all the rage, and that was my dream. I wanted to work for Image, and I remember going up, waiting in that long line. I got to the front. As you're seeing people being interviewed, you're like, I have no idea who's interviewing. It's because it's most likely an editor, right? Yeah. You don't know who they are. When I got to the front, it was Rob, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's one of the founders. He looked at my stuff. He said, okay, you're almost there, and like, would you be interested in doing an internship at Extreme? And I was just like, I was floored, because that's literally the first time I've ever showed my artwork, and I was not expecting that. So I was on cloud 9. The rest of that, and then I did show my stuff to Marvel and other places, and I didn't get a bite just with Rob, but yeah, that's how that happened. So it was a shocker, total shocker.
So then I'm curious to know, Andy, what was the journey like? That took you from comic book artist to director of visual development? Did I say that right?
You said it right. You said it right.
Said it right first.
So I did comic books, right? I worked with Rob for 2.5 years. Amazing experience, thrown in a bullpen of, 20 young artists, all, trying to like get attention. I drew some books over there. I rarely mention what they are because, again, remember how I started this? I said, I don't think I was ready, but I'm eternally grateful. After 2.5 years, I don't know what it was, but it was because I was getting better and better projects at Extreme, right? But I had just this desire in me to want to grow as an artist. And again, I never had any artists around me. I never had any formal training. I had this desire to like want to learn more about art and get formal training. I wanted to learn how to paint, because at that point I would see colorists, I would see people use ink and just different mediums. I'm like, I've never done any of that, right? So I'm like, but I had a desire to want to learn about color, learn about design, learn about how to paint and use different mediums from oil, acrylic, watercolor, and actually be trained, right? So I decided to take a hiatus and go to school, art school. And I remember the day when I quit from Rob, went to his office, scared out of my wits, and quit. And he offered me like, remember at that time there was that, what was that called? What did they do for Heroes Reborn?
Oh, that's right, for Marvel.
Yeah, so that was huge. And Rob had Captain America and Avengers. He actually offered me to do Avengers at that time. So, and those were selling like crazy, right?
It was the biggest thing around. Yeah,
so it was definitely tempting, but at that time, at that point, I was already determined. Like, it's not about like I'm not negotiating. I'm not trying to like play a game. My desire to grow I was kind of determined. So I left. I went to Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, and I studied as an illustration major. So I was there for two years. It's a 3-year program, 2 years, and every single day I'm doing life drawing. I'm doing life painting. I'm doing there's whole classes on just head drawing, when you're just doing charcoal. And then there's a whole class on head painting. Like, this is like, everything I wanted, right? And I'm using every medium from oil, acrylic, gouache, watercolor. I'm doing color theory classes, perspective classes. I was like, I never knew this kind of, thing existed, And then from there, obviously I had ties with my comic book connections. It was Matt Hawkins that while I was at art school, I was doing some Lady Pendragon, his own creator-owned book.
Right,
I was doing some.
He was with Top Cow.
Yeah. Well, actually, did he do that through Top Cow? I think he did it on his own first, right?
He did it on his own first, and it was doing really well. And then he went to Top Cow, and he was still doing it with Top Cow.
Yeah. So I think I did it before he went to Top Cow, because I remember when he got hired by Top Cow, and then it was at that point, that he asked me if I wanted to do, was it just 1 page? I forgot. It was 2 pages or something of Ascension, right?
Right. Yes, Ascension. Actually, I've got the the poster.
Yeah. I mean, it's your book, but I think I did just like a fill-in, just couple pages, right? And then I was like, oh my gosh! And I remember because that book, and obviously I was, a huge fan of yours, and collecting all your stuff, and so I was like, yeah, I'd love to, do something, because I was a huge fan of Top Cow stuff. All you, Joe Benitez, and Mike Turner, like everyone was, and obviously Mark. So yeah, I was honored to just do a couple pages, and then at that point, I guess Matt offered me to do. I think there was a Witchblade Darkness or something like. I think there was a Witchblade Darkness special that they were going to be doing, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's offering me a big book, right? So but then I had 1 more year to go of school, so I was kind of like, oh no. And then he called me a week later, because I told him I need to think about it, and he said, hey, actually, I have something else for you. We are getting the Tomb Raider license, and would you want to be the artist on that? And I was like, oh crap, like, because up until that point, there's never been a Tomb Raider comic book. And besides like that one shot that Mike Turner did. So I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be a huge book. She's an icon.
Height of popularity then. Yeah.
So it was one of those offers that I'm like, you cannot say no to. Yeah. And I knew that would, because I know up to that point, I've done comic books, but still relatively unknown. Like people don't really, know me in the comic book world. So I'm like, oh my God, that's one that can totally put you on the map, right? But of course, so freaking like intimidating too. But it's one of those opportunities where I'm like, I just have to do it, right? So I told my parents again, I'm dropping out again.
Cool, always be there, Mom. It's not going away.
That is the truth right there. And luckily, I have very understanding parents. So yeah, I did the Tomb Raider thing. I did that for 2.5 years, for 20 issues. Yeah, and then I got another itch. I got another itch where I'm like, I just spent the past 2+ years at Art Center learning about illustration and painting and everything, and then I went to Tomb Raider, and for the next 2.5 years, I'm only drawing with a pencil again, right? Which was an amazing experience. Like I was going on European tours, and the #1 issue was the highest grossing book of 1999, and I'm fully aware that has nothing to do with me, but it's but
I don't know, you're selling yourself short there.
People still buy the book.
No, I mean, of course, I'm proud of the stuff that I did, but no matter who drew that, it was going to be the #1 book for that for that year. But so I'm drawing with only a pencil for the next 2.5 years, and so that desire in me of like, oh my gosh, I want to paint, I want to do full illustrations, it just was so strong in me. So I decided, and by that time the internet was really flourishing, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're starting to really see artists online, and I would see concept artists, and I'm like, what is this concept art? Because video games slowly was becoming a bigger thing, and concept art was a new job that didn't exist before, because in the early days of Nintendo, it was like there's only like 8-bit, that kind of thing, right? Now they're like getting 3D, and it's just a lot more elaborate. So I would see artists like Justin Sweet, different artists where I'm like, wow, they're like digitally painting, right? I'm like, but it looks like a painting. So I'm like, that is something I would love to do. So I made that switch in my mind where I was like, I think I'm gonna pursue that. And just like you said, school will always be there. I had that same thinking about comic books. I'm like, comic books will always be there. But I want to try this out. I should mention one of the biggest reasons why I decided to go to art school was because even though I had a passion for comic books, I had this desire in me of like, I could always go back to comics, but I want to choose to do comics, not have to do comics because that's the only thing I know how to do.
Right.
If that makes any sense. So the last itch I had was I grew up as a Marvel fan, right? So I read some DC, but those characters just didn't speak to me. It was always the relatability of the Marvel characters, specifically like Iron Man. He was the first character I really got into, and then the Avengers characters. I was a big West Coast Avengers fan, and then the X-Men characters and Excalibur, and those felt more like adult or mature. So I had to bucket list. I had to do some X-Men work. So before I went to concept art, I got to do covers for Excalibur, Weapon X, and then they offered me a 3-issue fill-in for Uncanny XMen, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my #1 favorite book of all time. And it was with Chris Claremont writing, so I was just like, I have to do it. Even though at that point I already decided in my mind I'm not doing sequentials anymore because I'm making a transition. I had to do it, right?
Well, the thing about comics, they'll always put one more thing out there to keep you in.
Totally. That's the whole story of my career. Sorry, this is like the longest answer to your question, but I guess it's necessary to answer your question. Yeah. But I have the biggest respect for you, Dave, because how many years you've been doing like team books, and I'm used to doing single character like Tomb Raider, Lara Croft, and throughout my career. And then when I did Uncanny X-Men, and it was only 3 issues, that was like the hardest thing like I've ever done, because I'm like, every panel has like at least like 5 characters, and you're doing like at least 6 panels. That just took so long because every panel is essentially like an illustration, right? You have to do composition. So oh my gosh, I don't know how you can do like team books.
But yeah, they're a lot of work.
I think you notice he does a team book, then he does a single character book.
Yeah.
And you'll go back because you need a break.
If I can help it.
Yeah. If you need a break a bit.
Yeah, it's crazy. But I did that. They tried to get me to do some more, but by that, after I did my 3 issues, I'm like, okay, I need to, or else I'm just gonna I'll stay here forever, right? And I need to just explore that whole new world. And by that time, I was like essentially 10 years into my comic book career. And it was, scary because I'm like starting over, right? So I'm building, basically while I was drawing X-Men and doing Tomb Raider, I was slowly building a portfolio. So I was doing digital paintings on the side, learning. I first started digital painting with Corel Painter. That's what I was using. And that's stuff I had to learn on my own because, I didn't learn any of the digital stuff in school.
And there's just tutorials then that there are now. Now you just type it into YouTube.
Oh my gosh. I was trying to find tutorials and there was none, right? So I remember the only tutorial I found was, oh God, what is that guy's name? I think he was like the udon guy, Aristotle. I think his name was Aristotle. Sorry.
Google it.
Yeah, he had one tutorial, like a written tutorial on his website or something. And then, so I built a portfolio because I knew I wouldn't be able to get a concept art job just by showing them my Tomb Raider stuff or X-Men stuff. Because I need to show that I can design and that I can paint digitally, because I knew that's what concept artists did. I built that portfolio up, and I even took a class over at Noman Visual, the 3D school in Hollywood. They had a character design class, and taught by Kevin Chen and Anthony Francisco. And I used that to help me build up my portfolio, because I knew in 10 weeks, that'll force me to like build up my portfolio, right? Versus, when you're just trying to do it on your own, it's like, 10 weeks pass by and you're like, oh, I only did one drawing, that whole thing. But yeah, I did that. And the final of that class was Kevin. He knows a lot of industry friends in film and video games. We had a gallery show. So we had put all our work that we did in 10 weeks on the walls. So you pretty much have your own gallery space, and you could bring your portfolio, you could bring your business card, and you get to meet people. So that's where I met a guy named Charlie Wen, who at the time was the director of visual development at Sony Santa Monica that was doing the God of War games. So one thing about me is I'm not a gamer. And to this day, I'm still not a gamer. So I never heard of God of War at that time. But he said, we're looking for someone. So I got an interview, and I was like, oh, cool. And then I called my friend who was working at Blizzard at the time, World of Warcraft. And I'm like, hey, have you heard of a game called God of War? Is it good? you know, and he's like, yeah, it won Game of the Year. So I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, so I was just very fortunate that, you know, the first video game job I got was, you know, one of the best studios. But so I got thrown in there, you know, and that was a whole nother experience. That was the biggest culture shock of my career, because, you know, 10 years drawing comic books, you know this, you're left alone. You know, we're freelancers. Even if you're in a studio, you're just kind of like working and you're just doing your own thing. There's no one's really hovering over your shoulder and saying, can you change that? Or you're not going up to somebody like, can you approve this? You know, you're pretty much just deadlines. You're just drawing it. You turn it in, the inker inks it, they color it, it goes to print, for better or for worse. You know,
yeah, that's how it goes out.
Yeah, and for better or for worse, because a lot of times that happens, and then you see it in print, and you're like, you see all your mistakes, and you're like, oh crap, that head is too big. But you didn't have time to like check yourself. The shock of going into God of War was I'm in a studio full of concept artists. Well, there was like 6 of us, and your daily job is to be critiqued. So you would do a painting, director would look at it and say, no, or change this, change that. And then I think the hardest part was the job is like, they'll give you a character. So they'll give like 4 of you to do this one character, like this one Minotaur, right? And then we'll do it. We'll spend maybe 2, 3, 4 days, you know, a week on your versions. And then at the end of the week, we'll have a meeting with the director. He picks what he likes, right? So that alone, and then a lot of times they don't pick yours. So you're just like, oh wow, like this is weird. And one of the first characters I actually worked on was a boss character for God of War 2. And it came down to me and this one other guy. You might recognize this guy's name, Dwayne Turner.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was at that studio as a concept artist. I'm like, oh my gosh, I never met him before, but he was a concept artist, and it was down to me and him, right? We were both doing this one boss character. We spent a month. For the next month, we'd show the director. He'd say, oh, I like this from Andy's. I like this from Dwayne's. So we'd incorporate that into our designs, but also trying to do our own versions. A month went by, and they couldn't decide. They couldn't pick one of ours, so they put it up on the wall. They made everyone choose, like, which one do you like better?
It's like a vote of popularity. That's the most.
And I was in that room just watching like people pick and then pick, and then it was like 2. It was like 3 then 3, and then who gets the 4th vote, the final vote? It went to Dwayne. I remember walking away from that office feeling like, what have I done? Like, how, this is the job? Like, you spend a month, we're doing like, 10, 12 hours a day, every single day. And then I have nothing to show for it after a month. So I was like, oh, I don't know if I've made a right decision. But that's the longest answer to your question.
That's what stopped me from doing concept art. I did a little bit. I've done a few different times. Because I've really wanted to try it. I love designing, and going through that process is hard, especially as a comic artist originally, you get none of that. And for the most part, in my career, and I'm sure when you were doing your comics, if they need a character design, you design it right on the page. That's it.
Exactly. That's why it was such a shock. But that's what I've been doing since 2005, and it's a hard part of the job because there's no guarantee that they're gonna like yours, right? But it is constantly, there's that competitive aspect to it, because I always equate it to, when I talk to like my comic book peers, like imagine if you drew an issue of Ascension, and then the other person that's drawing it is Dave, and then you spend like 3 weeks on that book. You finish it, you draw it. At the end of the day, Mark's gonna pick who gets published. That's the equivalent. I'm like, that is painful.
Yeah. I couldn't even imagine that.
So what kind of advantage would you say, coming from a comic background, and you had Art Center Pasadena, I think, is acknowledged as the best art school anywhere I'm aware of, certainly. So you had that, but also, such a strong comic background. That had to have been a big advantage over people that wouldn't have had the ability to move figures the same way, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think my comic book background helps a lot, especially in keyframes, right? Because a lot of the keyframes we do, not all of them, like that WandaVision one that's in the background, a lot of them are action oriented. So there's going to be a lot of like this Thor fighting Hela, or different scenarios, and so you're going to be doing a lot of poses and that kind of thing. A lot of concept artists are used of doing standing characters that you can clear, because we're selling the costume, right? So there's only so much like poses that you can like kind of play with, right? Because you can't, even though you can do a dramatic pose, but if you're hiding like the arms like this, and even though it looks cool, you can't see the costume, so you have to do a lot of just standing shots, right? So I think keyframes, that helps a lot, and that's something that we're finding that is kind of a rare skill set. Like usually when you say keyframes in concept art, in the concept art world, it's usually more environment focused. So when you see concept art, keyframes, moments, there's usually like a small character on the side, and then you see this big set piece that's going on. But for us, our department, our whole focus is the heroes and the villains. It's to service those characters, the main ones. So our keyframes have to be hero-centric. So it is very similar to a comic book, right? A cover, right? Because you're trying to sell, why is Hela threatening and cool? Why is Thor cool, or whatever? Why is this moment, awesome? So the mindset is very much like I'm doing a comic book splash, but the only difference is I'm trying to render it in a way that's realistic,
Which is so much more difficult. I really love painting. My painting is always pretty much limited to, well, first of all, I never have time, but when I do, painting figures is one thing. Painting figures in an environment, making sure the lighting is consistent. If you have a cool lighting and getting that to reflect on the character, that kind of thing it's a huge skill set that, I certainly don't have, and most comic artists don't have.
Well, you certainly have it. Like, it's clear that you remember we talked about that on James' show, but the first painting you ever did was that one Ascension cover you did, and I remember seeing that, and I was just like, and at that point I was that Art Center, or maybe it was after Art Center, and I think I heard someone told me that was your first painting, and I was mad at you. I was like, that is just not right, because that looks like he's gone to school and everything.
I did tell you at the time, or well, I guess not. I told you when we did the last interview.
Yeah.
Nathan Cabrera did the background on that. Now, I did the rocks and so the figures, but the background, I fought with it. The background, that painting has got to be that thick by now. I went over, not figured it out. So Nathan actually really bailed me out of that one. And Nathan was a colorist. He was doing, back at the time, and I'm sure you remember this, the colorists would use markers and do little tiny versions as color guides, and then that would go to the computer colorist. Now it's all, one job. But
Yeah.
I've watched him. I can't paint for the last 15 years, and every time I'm just like, I wish I could not paint as well as you cannot paint, Dave.
Totally. Dave is very humble.
You have to admit, though, there's a very big difference between what most comic artists that paint, and even paint well, can do, and what somebody that really makes something like a full image that looks like a photographic image that could be on the screen. It's a different level.
Well, obviously there's Alex Ross and certain artists that are more like realistic, but yeah, it depends on what you're going for, right? Like if you're obviously I'm not trying to do a stylized painting, even though I would love to, and but obviously my job is to sell the reality of what this moment can be. So if I'm stylized, then I've failed in my job, because they'll be like, that's an amazing illustration, but I don't know that doesn't look like the actor. So, even down to like the actor's likeness, like that's a big part of the job, because we'll get those comments where like, that doesn't look like whoever. But yeah, I think that's where the art school like really helped. And then just obviously it takes a lot in comic books. You're pumping out these pages. There's no time to sit on one splash page for like a week. But for like doing a keyframe, which a lot of times can take a week, I'm doing a lot of referencing. I'm like, it's essentially the similar process as Norman Rockwell, right? He's doing a magazine cover, and he knows he wants to do a realistic style. He's not making it out of his head. He's getting. I wish we can do exactly what he does, because we don't have the time to get models and pay them and dress them up. And Alex does that, right?
Yeah, Alex does that.
Alex does that with pretty much. Pretty much every character you see on his painting.
he draws it because he's a great artist without, you know, and so he draws everything pretty nicely. And then because it's so well realized, he can just get models to, you know, pose in those positions, and it works great. He wouldn't be the painter that he is if he didn't have the ability to draw that way in the first place. So
exactly. And then, you know, that goes with, like, you know, artists like Drew Struzan or I mean, Norman Rockwell. All of them did the same thing. Like, they're amazing, you know, technical drawers, but they're not. Those artists are as famous and great as they are because they're not slaves to the reference, right? They're using the reference for them. So, and then they make it work for a while. And that's how I'll usually do it. I'll always draw it first. Like, this is the composition I want, whether it's a pose or a keyframe, and then, you know, even do the rough lighting and everything. And then I don't get to do it all the time because, again, of time, but a lot of times I'll just take quick photos of myself, or I'll set some lights up real fast, or I'll use, which they're in shadow, but hot toys, you know, and I'll pose them, or sometimes 3D models, you know, you can use those and light those as well. But
So Andy, if somebody, because a lot of the people who watch this program are young and aspiring artists, if somebody who has been working on their comic book art decided, hey, this sounds really cool to do concept art, what would be your advice for them, or what would your recommendation be in terms of, like, things to focus on, or the path to take?
Concept art. If you want to do concept art, usually you want
for it.
You don't have to go to school for it. This field is just like any other art field. The great thing about art is it does, and I've seen, you know, I've hired people through the years at both Sony and my you know, past decade at Marvel Studios. Not once did we look at, I mean, we don't look at the resume. Like, I don't know if they went to, most of them that I'll hire or will hire is like, I don't even know if they went to school, if they have a BFA or anything. It doesn't matter. Like, you could be, you know, 100 years old, you can be 5 years old. You know what it is. It's all your portfolio, right? If that thing's awesome, I guess the other component is that if that thing's awesome, then the next step is, are you also awesome as a person? You know, because if you're not
into the family,
because you know, for me I'm essentially an art director. So if I'm going to be hiring somebody, you know, I'm going to want somebody that's not going to be a diva, not going to, you know, not willing to take direction from me. So you're going to spend your days with this person. You want somebody who's going to be cool to work with. But it all comes down to the portfolio, right? So to answer your question, what are we looking for, or if you want to be a concept artist, it's really doing the research on, because there's so many different types of concept artists, right? So it's kind of a big question, but generally speaking, it's like there's environment concept artists who do like environments, which can compose of interiors, exteriors, natural, you know, sci-fi, all different types of environments. There's people who are like good at like vehicles and props, from weapons to guns, everything. There's creature designers, and then there's character designers, and of course some people dabble in multiple. But for the most part, if I always tell the young budding concept artists that want to get into the field, look at all the artists that you admire, right? That you have folders of on your desktop, right? Usually those artists are going to be they're good, and the reason why you like them is because they're pretty much good at that one thing. So, sometimes two, but it's for the most part. You know, I love Ian McCaig because he's amazing at characters. You know, he's designed Padme and you know, so many different amazing characters. You know, I love Justin Sweet because he does like those amazing character designs, and he could also do like really cool, like kind of keyframe type paintings. Or I love this designer because he's amazing at environments, or this guy's, you know. So for the most part, you want to focus. You want to know what is your strength and what is your passion, because usually those things go hand in hand. Because you don't want to just go after, like, I just want to go after the thing that is trendy, because that does happen. There are trends and things, or flavors and things that get popular. So I'm going to go in this style, that kind of thing. but what's going to sustain you is what you love. For me, obviously, it's, you know, I grew up with comic books. I love characters. I knew I was going to be a character designer if I'm going to be a concept artist, which, you know, dabbles into creature as well, right? And I've done, you know, environments professionally here and there, but I've always known that's not my, you know, I'm stronger at my characters. The only caveat to that I would say to young designers or people is, I think character designers is harder in a lot of ways, only because there's less jobs to be a character designer. Because if you think about a video game, if you think about an animated feature, you think about a movie, live action, how many characters are there in that movie? You know, there's whatever, a dozen, you know, at the most. But how many environments are in a game or in an animated show or in a movie, like, and things to design? There's tons and tons of stuff, like worlds, because you're building worlds, right? So there's a lot more needs for that. But if your passion is characters, you know, that's what you should pursue. So it comes down to your portfolio. And usually I say it's two things. One, you need to have strong foundation. So you need to show that when they see a painting of a character or an environment, that the viewer immediately says, oh, that's an awesome illustration, right? So versus if you look at something, you're like, oh, something looks off, or whether it's the anatomy looks off, the pose is weird, lighting seems off, you know, you don't want to have any of those kind of moments, right? It needs to just be like strong first read. And then of course, the second thing is design ability, right? Your creativity. Then after you get the viewer who's looking at your portfolio to be like, oh, this is awesome. Now, like, how good is this? Is this generic? Is this like a unique design sense? You know, because that's where you're going to be like useful, because pretty much everyone that's working, like all the freelancers and artists that work with me at Marvel Studios, they got the foundation down. So you don't have to worry about that stuff. Now it's just a matter of like their sensibilities, their designs, you know, everyone has different, you know, ways they kind of lean towards and what they're good at. And that's why we'll hire certain people.
A question it's been running through my head a little bit for a few minutes. When I did Ascension, I was looking at Nirasawa.
I remember.
And I'm still a huge fan of that stuff. And at the time, I thought this stuff is so fresh, because while some of it had seeped over here, for the most part, the world was a little bit more separated then. Now, to find something like to find your own voice and to really do something original just seems outrageously difficult. And so what do you do just to find something different?
That's a good question. You're right. It is such different times now, because it's good and bad, right? It's like, it's great because like everything's at our fingertips, right? But then also because of that, it is harder and harder to find the originality, because you can, you know, like so many people are using like the same points of reference. I think that's where every individual's life experience comes into play, right? And that's where everyone has their unique stamp, sensibilities, and that's the stuff that you want to tap into. So that's why a lot of times when I'm doling out assignments, you know, you go off of people's strengths, but you also challenge them, because you know, they have certain sensibilities. So even though they've never done, you know, this kind of design, you know, just because you've never done that before doesn't mean you can't do it. You know, you want to challenge them and push them. So I think in this job, we're constantly being pushed. We're never resting on our laurels. That's part of the reason why 10 years in, I'm still not bored. Like every studio I've ever been to, there's always a point where you're kind of like, you know, like you feel kind of antsy. Remember, like my whole story, every 2 years, it seemed like I'm like, I want something else. This is my 11th year here, and I'm not even close to like me feeling like, I'm tired. But it's also the nature of like, there's so many, like all the movies that we do, you know, there's a uniqueness to everything. But I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but I think it really is diving deep into, now that we have this plethora amount of places we can go, whether it's online, obviously doing research, and that's where I will search to the books. You know, it's all hidden behind here, but the years and years that I've collected books. So you look at artists, right? But I think one thing that I feel like is a must is to look beyond artists, right? Because you want to seek out new, fresh ways of seeing things. So I think, and different type, even if you are looking at artists, you're looking at different types of artists. You're looking at, for me now, it's like almost sometimes I will even go to comic book artists. I mean, obviously I have to for the designs based off of theirs, but then I'll look at American illustrators. I will look at Norman Rockwell and Mead Schaefer and John Singer Sargent, things like that, or sometimes Drew Struzan, and then a lot of times I'll go look at costume designers and real world stuff. So a lot of things that we're doing is based off of real worlds, but you want to give it a twist. So especially in the early days, for the Avengers, a lot of the Avengers characters, we're trying to make it more realistic rather than going the Alex Ross route of translating it faithfully as a comic. Right. And it looks amazing, but his is like this classic, like if you just take it exactly as is and you just made it into real materials, right? Which is great, but obviously the world that we're trying to tell since the first Iron Man was a different sensibility than that. In all honesty, it was more of a lot of it took nods to like the Ultimates, right? Because that was kind of the first time in comics where like, oh, they're doing more of a cinematic, realistic twist on the classic, right? So those early days, we're looking a lot at tactical uniforms, like real world stuff, right? Mm-hmm. When I'm working on Thor, one of the films I worked on this past year was Thor: Love and Thunder. Like I'm constantly looking at Norse mythology, looking at old historical, real costumes and materials, and so taking that and then giving it a spin, a twist. Obviously making it MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, that style. So you're trying to grab from different areas to stay fresh, to stay motivated. So whenever I'm doing any character design, the first thing I'll do is spend like at least an hour just research. Whether it's my own books, online, Pinterest, Google Images, just find things that don't even relate to what you're designing. Mm-hmm. And then through that research, you're getting ideas, like you're getting inspired. And those are the things that kind of like help you to like, so I will look at the artists as well, but it shouldn't just only be artists, or else you're just going to be like recycling what they've already researched themselves.
Yes, you see that all the time. You really do.
Yep.
I have to say though, whenever because I do that, I'll just stop and I'll just kind of take some things in and try and find some different ideas. And whenever Meredith sees me do that, she just calls it wasting time. So.
No, inspiration is huge.
It really is wasting time. Sometimes. A lot of times. When you're asleep on the couch, it doesn't work through osmosis.
Right.
That's time. You can't put the book on your face and close your eyes and hope you get something.
Yeah, you mentioned Ultimates with Brian Hitch. Brian
Hitch, yep.
And I really think that the modern Marvel Cinematic Universe definitely owes a huge debt of gratitude to him. And
Totally.
This is one thing about being artists like us. You get accolades and people see your work, but sometimes I think, it's a shame that the general public just will never really know just how influential he was to everything Marvel's doing now, or Adi Granoff with his Iron Man.
Totally. Yeah. I give so much props to Brian Hitch, Adi, because those are two guys. You hit it nail. Hit it in the head of the nail. Who really modernized, took the classic. And I remember when I first saw Adi's like Iron Man covers, I was like, whoa, because again, Iron Man was probably the first comic book character that I fell in love with, right, as an adolescent. And Adi's was the first one where you're like, that looks believable. Like he didn't just turn muscles into metal and somehow metal can bend at joints and everything. Like you could say, oh, you could actually build that. And then I remember reading Ultimates with Brian Hitch and all your fanboy dreams of like, I'm watching a movie, I'm reading a movie. Like this felt like a movie. And he's taking not only, I mean, obviously Mark Miller and the story is making it cinematic, but his drawings and then his designs, you're like, wow, he's giving it a realistic spin. So yeah, totally. The early MCU stuff, totally. We were totally looking at Brian Hitch and Adi. Obviously, he was designing the first one with Jon Favreau, with Ryan Meinerding and Phil Saunders. So yeah, totally.
So is there anything that you're working on now that you can tell us about that's coming up, or is it all top secret?
I mean, no, I could. Some of it's top secret, but I mentioned
Thor.
Past year I was working on Thor: Love and Thunder. It's a shame that Black Widow, because that's the one I led the team on that, where like that was supposed to come out early last year, and we're just like waiting. Worked on that one. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. I worked on that last year as well. And then WandaVision currently, and I've been working on Captain Marvel 2 and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania.
Oh my gosh, I know one 12-year-old child who's going to be thrilled to hear that movie's coming out. A new Ant-Man movie coming, and he's going to be through the roof.
Yeah,
I know that the kids love that one.
Yeah. I know what it is, but they just like the Ant-Man. He's like,
he was younger when the first one came out. It had Thomas, a huge Thomas engine.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Just about blew a gasket. That was almost the end. In the theater.
yeah. Ant-Man is one of those like so crazy because I never cared for Ant-Man growing up because it's such a goofy kind of premise and character, and you're like, we always wanted to be Superman or Wolverine or something cool. Like no adolescent males wanted to shrink. That's not something we really like aspire.
I think that must be. Yeah, pre-adolescent boys. They're like, I could get small and run away from my mom and not have to do anything.
But it's crazy because, like, I remember working on that one with Edgar Wright in the beginning, and then eventually Peyton Reed. And it's one of those like, really, we're really gonna do an Ant-Man film? Do we really want the studio to go down? But man, all credit goes to them because, and that was one of the early characters I got to design. But that one, I remember going to the premiere and watching that and leaving the theater and going to my coworkers and just being like, our jaws were on the ground. We're like, that was a really good movie. Like it was a shocker, So he is a fan favorite, especially amongst like the youth. My kids love him as well.
It's got to be pretty special to be able to say, Dad created this character, and bring his friends to the movie, and there it is, right up on the screen. It's pretty. I've got comics. My kids don't care.
Oh, really?
No, not at all.
What are they into? Like video games?
Video games, yeah.
Anime.
Yeah.
Okay,
anime. Yeah, anime is huge among the youth. Yeah.
Anime right now.
Yeah, it really is. One day I'll get
it. Is he in? Wait, your son? Your son?
Yeah.
Is he into the movies?
Oh yeah, he loves the movies. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Usually comics is tough. It's tough. It's more like people our age are into comics. But
anime is sort of it's like the gateway drug.
It certainly can be.
Let's hope. Let's hope.
And things go through up times and down times, and I think right now I've really thought with the movies that comics would just blow up and we'd be selling so much, but the movies did it so well that it's tough to compete with that. I mean, it's pretty amazing, and people just don't read quite as much as they did. But I think the more things go over digital, and she's poking me.
I'm not poking him.
She poke me. Is it because I'm running off the rails?
A little bit.
Okay, it's because I was running off the rails.
No, those are good things to talk about because it is hard. I mean, especially right now with the shakeup at DC, and there's this weird transition, and it is tough because like comics has that traditional model, and even when I go to the store now, because I love comics, but I've kind of gone away from reading them, but I always want to. So every time I go back into a comic book store and I pick up a comic, there's so many titles and I'm confused, and then I don't recognize anything, so I don't know where to start. And then on top of that, they're like, aren't they like $4 or $5 now? So it's like it's really hard to compete when you can, and a comic you read in like 20 minutes, and then you spend that same amount of money and you could spend like hours on a video game. So it's a real challenge that.
Or go into a movie and maybe it's twice the cost for a comic, but you get a story that you understand.
Yeah.
missing out on, oh crap, I started at issue 52. I should have started at issue 51.
Well,
and the store was sold out of this issue. And
I think that this might be kind of the future of comics.
Yeah.
Going forward, we might not be doing as many monthly, and it'll go maybe toward more of a European model where you'll have a full book. I'd like to see
more than graphic.
I've always liked that. I remember when I went on that European tour during my Tomb Raider days, and that's when I first was introduced, because that was 1999 or year 2000. People didn't know about like Claire Wendling and these albums, and Meta Baron and all that. But I came back with a whole freaking box shipped back to me, because I'm like, what is this treasure trove of amazing like albums? And then I talked to artists over there at that time, and they get to spend a year on it. And I'm like, and then they did the full illustration. So actually at that time, because that was after Art Center, I was like, I'd rather do that than the monthly, like, just penciling and that kind of thing.
I know you've talked about it a little bit too. We've explored it, but it just never worked out.
It never worked out. But right now I'm working on a longer form book that I'm penciling and inking, doing the whole works. And
wow.
Well, okay, pencil and inking. I've got a colorist. I stick with it. But it's all going to be one book, and I'm very hopeful that it'll do well, because of that format. I think it will. So
yeah,
things are changing.
That's cool. Is it your creator owned, or is it like for a studio, or for the?
It's creator owned.
Yeah.
That's all he can say.
Okay. Yeah. That's cool. That's exciting.
You're not allowed to say stuff because this is actually going to be on the internet, so you can't say anything. I know you're like, I could see you were inclined to like give a little bit more detail.
Oh yeah, I want to tell you all about it.
But
not
right now.
No, when the time's right.
When the camera's off.
Yeah, totally. Oh, I can't wait.
Sorry, people.
Yeah.
Oh, Andy, this has been so great. Thank you so much for taking the time to tell us. I feel like I have more of an insight now into a new job. Maybe Isaac could do this.
He needs to move away from the anime. Yeah. Anime is great stuff, but
concept art, Isaac. Concept art.
Hey, anime is huge, and that whole industry is a big industry in itself. That's something that we don't really have access to, because over there in Asia, they have like webtoons. They have like they have a whole different model.
It's a tough go being North American and trying to work in that industry, and I say that all the time. He doesn't listen to me. I'm like my dad. He was an engineer, trying to tell. Go into math, and now I'm just doing it with Isaac. No, you need to.
We don't really tell him everything.
Oh, I try.
Now that kid's gonna find his own way. I give up. I'm like, just graduate high school. That's my goal.
We are in different times. They do find different ways that it's not the traditional way of, succeeding. Although we were kind of like rebels in that way, not doing the traditional way of.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we really were.
Yeah.
All right, we've been so fortunate to have Dave's friend, Andy Park, on with us tonight, certainly educating me about his job and what it means to do concept art. And I learned a new phrase today. What is it, the picture that you do? I lost it already.
Keyframes?
Keyframes. I learned a new keyframe. So excited. I'm going to hashtag keyframes, everything. Okay. If you are not watching WandaVision, then you must be living under a rock, because even the Finches are watching it, and it is fantastic. So kudos to you, Andy, for another great job. Well done. And make sure you catch the final episode of WandaVision, or maybe you're going to wait and just binge it all afterwards.
Or watch it all
I don't think you should. I think you should savor it slowly.
That's how we've been doing it.
Yeah, savor it, because it's
how do you avoid spoilers? There's so much spoilers online.
I have the same problem with UFC. I love UFC, and
me too.
Reading UFC news and trying to, because I've got Fight Pass.
Oh, nice.
The pay-per-views, they don't come up right away, and I'm not paying. So yeah, it's always.
I know.
We just live under.
Yeah, that one.
We avoid spoilers because I personally live under a rock.
Right. Well, I don't quite as much, but I try. So.
Yeah, this one's hard. It's like because people watch it at midnight. Friday morning, midnight, whatever, Thursday night.
Right away.
Yeah.
And then there's already spoilers online. It's like you can't even look at Twitter.
Yeah. Stay off your social media, and then watch it.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Andy. This was really great. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it, and continued success to you guys, and yeah, everything on your move and your shows and YouTube and your comics.
If my hair doesn't turn white next time you see me, we'll know why.
Cool.
All right, make sure you hit like and subscribe and check out all of Dave's awesome tutorial videos while you're at it.